All right, welcome back to Instagram Live. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum with Barbell Medicine.
Drew's saying, says, I lose brain cells when you don't post vlog. I lose brain cells when I don't post vlogs.
Is doing leg extension machine bad for your knees? Nope. All right, welcome back to Instagram Live. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum with Barbell Medicine. It is October 25th, Friday. I'm going to try to get in the habit of doing these live things a little bit more often. I miss them. I miss you guys. If you've never joined us on one of these before, it's just a Q&A session. You guys ask questions. I try to provide answers, nuanced answers, to the best of my ability. If I don't get to your question, I apologize. If it seems like I skipped over your question, I also apologize, but perhaps this isn't the best place for it, in which case, let's say head over to our forum, go to barbellmedicine.com, look on the forum, sign up for the forum, and you can ask questions. We're pretty active on there. Let's go over some announcements first. So announcement number one, we have a bunch of new content coming out next week. We got a podcast with Alan Flanagan. We have a blog post about that podcast going up the same day. That's on Monday as well. Have our vlog from Raw Nationals going up next week. We have our newsletter that's going to go out next week. We have our Barbell Medicine Research Review that's going to go out not next week, but the Monday following. Our first Pain and Rehab seminar in Boston. We have another Pain and Rehab seminar coming up in January in Reno, Nevada. So if you want to sign up for that, you head over to eventbrite.com. We also have a few spots left open for our Portland, our regular Barbell Medicine seminar in Portland. That's coming up here in a few short weeks. So again, you can sign up on our website or eventbrite.com, search Barbell Medicine. Let's see, what else? New Barbell Medicine shirts are going to be up in the shop tonight. There are logo shirts, those cool ones that we were wearing at Raw Nationals. Let's see, is there anything else that I'm missing? I'm sure there's stuff that I'm missing. But I want to make sure that we get to some good questions, some good content here. So let's go into Instagram and get some questions. Now, you guys who are going to watch this on YouTube in the future may be wondering, why aren't you streaming live on YouTube? Well, one, the algorithm is not great. They it doesn't pop up in people's search engines for, when they search for Barbell Medicine Q&As. I don't know. So it's not good for views unless I post it like this. Then two, internet connection, bandwidth, all that stuff is tough, even if I try to do this like one-man show for YouTube live streams. So may get there in the future if I get somebody else to help me out here. But otherwise, it's just me. So, all right, we're scrolling up. I'm going to find some questions. Hey, Jordan, are leg extensions bad for your knees? So this is actually something that comes up all the time. Leg extensions being quote-unquote bad for your knees. And so then when you ask people why do they say that it's bad for your knees, and they say, oh, well, the moment arm on the knee, there's a shearing force, and this is bad. That force, that type of force is bad for the knees because you're applying force at the end of the lower limb segment right near the ankle, right? That's where the pad of the leg extension machine sits, and then there's support underneath the actual knee joint itself, and so you got this long moment arm, and it causes shear forces on the knees, or people say it's an open chain exercise, and those are inherently worse for apparently pain outcomes, which is not based in evidence. So the leg extension is a perfectly fine exercise, does not appear to cause knee injury if you use any reasonable definition for injury, so something that precludes folks from participating in sport or the recreational pursuits. Causes pain, right? Causes dysfunction, and it has to probably do that for a certain period of time, right? If it causes pain for 5 minutes and then it goes away completely, it doesn't affect your ability to again participate in sport, participate in recreational pursuits, or activities of daily life for more than 5 minutes. Then I don't know that that's an injury, right? So, leg extensions are a fine exercise. They're probably, they're not very specific to squats or deadlifts or anything like that. So from a strength training perspective, probably not terribly useful. But for from a bodybuilding perspective, from a rehab perspective, they have some use. Particularly getting people to believe that their knees aren't always going to hurt every time they apply force through that. The reason why they're so useful in bodybuilding is because you can do a ton of reps and sets without really over-fatiguing the person, whereas you can't really do the same for squats. So it's funny, when Austin and I were actually at our CrossFit Level 1 MD, the certification course in Hawaii. It was in Hawaii on the island of Kauai. It was funny because when they started talking about pain and injury, I was the one who piped up and was like, "Hey, that's probably not correct. We should probably think about it like this and make sure not to build these, harmful narratives." Because Austin, was his blood pressure was through the roof. And then when they started talking about some nutrition stuff that was inaccurate, my blood pressure was through the roof, and Austin actually was piped up. So it was kind of interesting that we both like had each other's backs on that. And yeah, they said at that seminar like, "Oh, well, I can prove to you that the leg extension is a far more dangerous exercise than the squat." And he's like, and goes through that mechanical analysis, which is not only a complete misrepresentation of where we're at with respect to modeling pain, from the biomedical model versus biopsychosocial model, and then also just completely like negates people building their own positive narratives around exercise. So if somebody tells you that you put in a position of power, like, "Hey, this exercise is dangerous for you. This exercise can hurt you. This exercise is uniquely dangerous. This exercise is bad for you," then anytime that you are exposed to it, you probably run a greater risk of having pain afterwards. Whereas it's just a completely neutral stimulus, as long as you don't color it or filter it incorrectly based on your individual characteristics, which includes psychological and social inputs, then you're probably going to be fine. So I actually did some leg extensions today. There you go. All right, considerations for golf and tennis strength and conditioning is not a question so much as a big topic, right? Considerations for golf and tennis strength and conditioning. So from a conditioning standpoint, the way I kind of analyze this stuff, first, let's look at the conditioning components. So what do you need for a golf from a conditioning component? Probably not that much uniquely in the way of actual like cardiorespiratory fitness, just because the nature of the sport is, you end up taking so many swings, they last this long, and you have a lot of downtime in between. You might make a case that a person with better aerobic fitness is better able to tolerate either multiple rounds in a day or multiple rounds over the course of a weekend, and I would get behind that. That being said, I don't think it's unique to golf. I think, all sport, all recreational physical pursuits probably benefit from increasing aerobic fitness. Tennis is different because the plays can last longer, so probably a bigger impetus for anaerobic conditioning in a way, and particularly running at high speeds, because that's how they end up cutting across the course, or the court, not the course. Sorry, got golf and tennis mixed up there. From a strength perspective, you'd certainly want to participate in more high velocity force production stuff, so the weight's necessarily going to be lighter, so that you can train squat, bench, deadlift, press, or any variation of those things at a lighter weight, so you can move them at high velocities. That would probably be a big component there. Doesn't mean all of the work would be high velocity, but a substantial portion of it. You'd probably also want to do some rotational work as well. That being said, when you look at like meta-analyses, particularly on golf, I've been super interested in this because I've been playing a bunch of golf lately. It seems like anything that makes golfers stronger and able to produce more force makes them be able to hit the ball a little harder, a little more ball speed, a little more club head speed. So, and this is obviously in the context of practicing the sport. So you wouldn't just want to like go to the gym and not go to the range, not go to the course, not practice your sport. That would be silly. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different options. There's probably no one set of exercises that is like, this is the best stuff, but you would definitely have some high velocity work, some rotational work, and then your traditional S&C stuff. So hopefully that helps. Do you have any tips on how to use a belt? I've never used one. Yeah, so a couple of tips. So one, purchasing a belt, like I want a belt. What do I do? I don't have any brand allegiance to any particular belt manufacturer. I personally think that most folks who are getting into strength training should get a 4-inch wide belt, and then as far as the thickness goes, I like a 13 millimeter belt. A 10 millimeter belt is that's the other common size for these suede belts. I don't recommend a Velcro belt unless you're just doing Olympic weightlifting. But yeah, other than that, I wouldn't get a Velcro belt, and they're not legal in most powerlifting federations or any powerlifting federations as far as I'm aware. In any event, I think 13 millimeter belt that's my preference. If you want to, you have any inkling of being a power lifter, or you just want a really good belt to go lift all the weights, I would get a 4-inch belt. That's like the standard. 10 millimeter belt's a little thinner, so if you're on the lighter side or have no ideas about competing in the future, 10 millimeters fine, but I would recommend a 4-inch wide, 4-inch wide, 13 millimeter thick belt. Single prong is my preference. Double prong is fine, a little bit more finicky to latch, but some people like those. My first belt was a double prong. And if you want a lever belt, that's cool too. I don't like them. Austin loves them. So that's anyway. You have a bunch of different options, but that's kind of how you would make your decision. And then as far as how to use it, main thing is to figure out the appropriate level of tightness. And where to wear it. Those are the two big considerations. So I would recommend wearing it as tight as it can be without it moving around or compromising your ability to perform a Valsalva maneuver. So if it's so loose that it's moving around when you lift, you should probably go in another hole. If it's so tight that you can't actually take a big deep breath because it's really constricting you and constricting your ability to expand your thoracic and abdominal cavities, then it's probably one too tight. And then as far as where to wear it, I think you should put it on one hole a little too loose, then do a squat with it, and the belt will usually kind of drift to the right position for you to get started, general rule of thumb, and you're going to kind of be able to figure it out over time where you prefer it, but that's a good place to start. So, and then after you figure out where it's supposed to sit, cinch it down one more hole, and you're ready to go. That's what I think you should do with a belt. You're going to, on a squat, for example, you're going to walk the weight out. You're going to do the Valsalva maneuver, which means take a big breath and hold it, bear down. Some people like to think about expanding their abdomen or bracing. I prefer the bracing, where you're trying to almost make yourself do a mini crunch while you take this big breath in and hold it. That's my preferred method. I don't think you should try to actively push your belly out against the belt. I don't think that's a terribly useful cue, although sometimes it works. It's hard to speak in absolutes here. Let's see. Spring 2020 seminar in Virginia Beach. We are coming to Norfolk, Virginia in spring of 2020. I think it's spring. It's either spring or summer. I don't know when the cutoff is, and I actually forget the date of our seminar, but it's on our 2020 schedule. Yes, I am filming my documentary reaction video. It's not like my documentary. It's to the Game Changers video, the new Netflix, I think it's on Netflix, documentary about vegan athletes. So that'll be fun. I'm going to film that tomorrow. Biggest mistake of your coaching career? I don't know. What's one thing you might have done differently in hindsight? I mean, the biggest thing I think, which is not unique to coaching, it's just this is how people learn and actually become educated and experienced in their field. You just end up being overconfident at first. So I think it would have been nice to have found a mentor earlier in my coaching career that would have led me down the right path, and I don't know that I can be too critical on myself because this just happens, but probably the first 2 years of my coaching career, I was kind of it was a perfect situation. There wasn't a lot of information out there on coaching, just period. And then 2, there weren't a lot of people who were in the space who were writing articles or were available for this mentorship kind of thing. And so everyone's out on their own in the wild, wild west. You really had Deep Squatter with Louis Simmons. YouTube was barely, getting, lifting videos up, certainly not instructional stuff. And then seminar wise, I mean, man, you really just had the USAW and USA Track and Field. Those were the only, and CrossFit, those are the people doing seminars, and CrossFit had just started really. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be too critical of myself, but if I had to do it over again, I would have probably tried to seek out a mentor earlier on in my coaching career, and that would have instilled in me some more humility right off the bat. That would have been a good idea. Thank you for podcast recommendation on lipids on the JAMA podcast. Oh yeah, so if you have not gone over to, wherever you get your podcast from, JAMA Clinical Reviews, they have really great frequent podcast uploads where basically they interview and talk about the latest science with the researchers who performed the review. This one's actually with Brian Ferentz, who is an absolute savage in the world of lipidology and cardiovascular disease. And this latest one, I think it's lipids and cardiovascular health. I think it's the title of it on JAMA, which stands for Journal of American Medical Association, clinical review. Would recommend listening to that. And he's got 2 new papers, I think, or at least 1 new paper that he's author on, and I don't know if he's a co-author on the second one. That was published in New England Journal of Medicine. The other one was published at JAMA. So in any event, he's got a bunch of other great papers on this subject as well. Would recommend listening to that podcast. Is there a specific point where you would recommend someone stop weight loss after a significant drop to start gaining lean weight again, or just personal preference? I mean, as long as we're not talking about people who are going to an underweight situation based on BMI, or who have lost a significant amount of muscle mass, should become, at that point, they would be cachectic if you lost a bunch of lean body mass and fat mass. One of the differences between cachexia and sarcopenia is you can actually lose muscle mass and gain fat, or have too much fat and be sarcopenic, have sarcopenic obesity, whereas cachexia is like this global loss of flesh, both fat and muscle tissue, and there's some other syndromic kind of symptoms that are associated with that as well. So yeah, provided we're not talking about anything like that, yeah, it's really just personal preference. I mean, how big and jacked do you want to be? Yeah, I think gaining lean body mass is certainly useful for gaining strength and also carrying more lean body mass, obviously. But there's no this is how lean you should get with respect to kind of lean body mass. Again, as long as we're not talking about people who develop medical conditions from losing so much weight. Yeah. Does a leg press engage more muscle fibers than the barbell squat? No, I don't think so. And it really depends on. I kind of go one step further to try to clarify this question. So if we're just restricting this analysis between leg press and barbell squat to muscle fibers of the lower extremity, so of the legs, and we're not talking about the trunk or and back, that's the only real fair comparison that you can make, because the squat obviously is going to engage more of those muscle fibers due to the fact that it's freestanding. The additional joints are moving, so you have a lot more muscle mass involved than a leg press. But with respect to just lower extremity motor unit recruitment, yeah, you're really not going to see a big difference. Probably about the same, as long as both exercises are being done to close to failure for a similar amount of reps. Yep. Good afternoon, Doc. Well, it's, what time is it? It's almost 6 p.m. I guess where you're at, it's good afternoon. All right. How and why is training a few reps from failure beneficial for strength purposes? So the first part of this, strength is specific to context, to how it's trained, So for instance, if you only train sets of 10, then you're likely to get the biggest payoff, the biggest transference, the biggest carryover to like a 10 rep max or heavy set of 10. Conversely, if you only train 5s, your biggest transference or carryover or training outcome improvement is likely to be strength in sets of 5. So, you'd have to further refine this question to make it to clarify. Are we talking about 1 RM strength, 5 RM strength, 10 RM strength, 20 RM strength? But if we're just talking about strength in general, to the extent that even exists, right? The ability to produce force across a bunch of different in a bunch of different contexts. Training a few reps shy of failure effectively is a strategy to recruit more motor units. So let's say you're doing a heavy set of 5. The first rep, and these are all just made up numbers. These are not experimentally determined numbers, but, for the sake of this argument, this general premise holds true. So a set of 5, heavy set of 5 is like 86% of a 1 RM. So a 5 RM is about 86% of somebody's 1 rep max, give or take, because people are different. Doing the first rep, you might engage, 65, 70% of all of the muscle fibers that you can volitionally recruit. Rep number 2, you're at 75%, maybe getting close to 80% of all the volitional muscle fibers that you can volitionally recruit. And this is not 100% of all your muscle fibers, just the ones that you have volitional access to. By rep 3, you're getting close to 100% of all of the motor units that you can volitionally recruit. And then reps 4 and 5, you're pegged 100% or close enough to all of those muscle fibers that you can volitionally recruit. So by training close to failure, but not necessarily to failure, you get that motor unit recruitment. Same thing happens at sets of 10, 20, 25, 30. It's just the actual adaptations that you're selecting for are specific to the rep ranges that you're engaging in. That's the biggest kind of difference there. Any plans for selling a Barbell Medicine banner for those of us with garage gyms? So we just made a bunch for the coaches. I don't know if we'll be releasing them publicly, but it's not off the chart. Not off the table. Off the chart? Off the table. Yeah. What sort of training block are you running right now? I saw you enjoying those sweet 15s. Also, any reason for the 15s or just a bit of fun? Yeah, so this is just a pivot week. I just had a meet 2 weeks ago and about ready to get back into regular training. Might have another week of just kind of low stress, different exercises, different rep ranges, all that sort of stuff. So 15s, it's light enough where it's not going to cause a ton of fatigue, get a nice little pump, and then move on. Yep. If you could go back and teach 30-year-old Jordan one piece of advice, what would it be? So I'm 34. So this is 4 years ago. What was I doing at age 30? I think I turned 30. I was in residency, I guess. What would I teach myself then? I don't know. I probably just would have tried to sleep more. Like, I think that would have been the big thing. Try to get more sleep. Yeah. Almost done with the legacy, 12-week strength, and not sure which new template to do next. Did GPP, hypertrophy the first half of 2019, then did Thrall's free program before this, and want to keep focusing on powerlifting. Yeah, if you did 12-week strength, I'd do powerlifting too. You did powerlifting 2 or powerlifting 3. Yeah, one of those two. If you're interested in getting stronger, those would be the two most focused ones and most appropriate for you given what you recently ran. Yeah. Is it a waste of a workout if I go out and drink later that night? Waste of a workout? No, not necessarily. I mean, alcohol has some significant effects on muscle protein synthesis and muscles themselves and your sleep architecture and, all sorts of stuff. So it can certainly compromise or attenuate strength improvements if you go out and get drunk, sure. But having a few drinks, probably not going to be a big deal. Yeah. If your goal is hypertrophy and you're an advanced lifter, could you make an argument that it would be counterintuitive to run a hypertrophy block while on a calorie deficit? I mean, you're unlikely to gain a significant amount of lean body mass while you're in a calorie deficit. So I don't know that it's counterintuitive because if the calorie deficit it runs long enough and is significant enough, think about getting ready for a bodybuilding show, for example, then some principles or practices that are normally used in hypertrophy training, so higher reps, significant amount of isolation exercises or less fatiguing exercise selection, stuff like that, would all be useful, especially when you think about the main role of training. There's really two main roles. Primarily is to reduce any lean body mass losses, and then two is sort of a metabolic thing, burn calories to increase your sort of calorie burn, total daily energy expenditure throughout the day. So you have higher volume usually in hypertrophy blocks. You have less fatiguing exercises, which can be useful during periods of higher stress, higher environmental stress, maybe in this case due to the dietary constraints. And then you're still getting that muscle stimulation to preserve lean body mass to the best of the ability you can. So, Jordan, thank you for all the info you have shared about training and injuries. It has helped my training tremendously. Sick. All right. Question: any benefit to occasionally squat without knee sleeves? If so, when? So I think if you go and look at what sort of benefits do you get out of squatting with knee sleeves, that helps better answer this question. So as far as actual scientific literature on neoprene knee sleeves, best data we have on this stuff is in osteoarthritis. People tend to report lower pain scores during physical activity with a neoprene sleeve. Also increases some joint warmth. Or temperature of the joint. People subjectively report that their joints feel a little looser, more mobile, and might decrease their pain a little bit. On the other hand, if you start relying on knee sleeves all the time, this is a fairly innocuous kind of training tool, but you would hate to be hamstrung, pun intended, by always using knee sleeves. So Should you always use knee sleeves? I mean, I think if you're getting ready for a powerlifting meet and the performance in the gym and the training stress from the gym is very, very important to driving training outcomes, sure, I also don't think, there's any huge benefit to training without knee sleeves outside of, if you ever forget them, then you're fine. If you wanted to do both, I think that's reasonable as well. I don't really have a strong opinion on this. And so when would I do it? Supplemental squat movement would probably be a good place to use it. Pivot weeks, maybe don't wear your knee sleeves. But yeah, those would be the places I wouldn't wear them necessarily. Let's see. Hi, Doc. If you have a diet high in saturated fat, but you maintain good BMI, good waist circumference, good lean body mass, train hard, and normal blood pressure, are you still at risk? Are you still at an increased risk of ASCVD? So ASCVD stands for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So yes, diets high in saturated fat compared to diets that are lower in saturated fat tend to increase the risk of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. The cut point is about 10% of total daily calories from saturated fat tend to promote deleterious changes in people's lipid profile, meaning that they have more atherogenic lipid profiles, usually LDL particle concentration, so total LDL count. Some evidence with triglycerides in there, but that's for a whole nother story. The podcast with Flanagan is going to cover this in more in depth. So replacing saturated fats with things like polyunsaturated fatty acids tend to be the most efficacious. Monounsaturated fatty acids still efficacious. Replacing them with complex carbohydrates that are high in fiber, also efficacious at reducing risk of ASCVD, again, just atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Replacing with sugar makes it worse. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about somebody who eats a diet that's got 11% of their total daily calories from saturated fat versus 8% of total daily calories from saturated fat, it's probably not a big deal to be in that range. But if you're talking about somebody who's following the carnivore diet and their total daily calorie intake, 70% of their total daily calories come from saturated fat, and they bring it down to 10, that would be a significant improvement. Now, so having a good BMI, appropriate blood pressure, etc., all good things, but there are other components that drive ASCVD. So would not recommend just YOLOing your saturated fat intake. Jordan, loving strength 3 so far. One thing I've noticed when I deadlift, the first rep of the set usually feels harder than the second and third. Any ideas why? Yeah, this is not an unusual phenomenon. So one, there's this thing called the warm-up effect, where basically you're kind of tentative on the first rep because you're either low-key afraid or scared that maybe it's going to hurt, and you're not really allowing all of your volitional motor units to kind of fire with maximum force. You kind of have a brake on you, a restrictor plate, if you will. And then there's also another thing that we see where people set up for the first rep incorrectly, and then they get feedback on that based on how the first rep moved, and then they fix it for their second and third rep. Cerebellum and other pathways through the brain and spinal cord are like, hey, let's refine this. Let's get you a little more efficient here. So one thing you can do is just pull all of your sets as singles. So you pull a set of 5 as 5 singles. One way to kind of make sure that you can get over both of those things, the warm-up effect, and then also maybe if your technique needs some refinement. Do you have any recommendations for someone wanting to start a blog but not fall into the trap of peddling misinformation because lack of expertise? Well, a couple tips. If you want to start like a resource that you're going to keep up with and ideally direct people towards, one is to come up with a bunch of information before you launch, so that way you're not searching for content immediately, like you have good content. 2, making confident claims without supporting evidence is problematic. So that's something that you probably should avoid, and I think you'd be okay, Dylan, just knowing you and kind of how your mind works. And then finally, I don't know that I would be writing or opining about things that I have no expertise in. Just, like I'm trying to think. So for example, I am not an expert in reproductive physiology, fertility, for example. I know people who are experts in that, and if I wanted to write something about that, and I would probably reach out to them, either after having written what I wanted to write and using the appropriate resources to kind of get me closer to the truth. But I would want to make sure that an expert weighs in on something that I don't, am not necessarily as well versed in as I'd like to be. What are some good rehab exercises for the patella? My patella has been strained and is popping every time I squat and begins to hurt. Yeah, so the patella is a sesamoid bone. So you wouldn't really want to rehab the bone unless it's fractured. But if you have knee pain, then you would want to find ways to train that do not exacerbate your knee pain and allow you to kind of move it through a range of motion, under load, and ultimately get back to your previous activity level. So if what you're doing now doesn't let you do that, I think that you would first go to exercise modification. So modifying the tempo, the range of motion, the load, all of those things, and maybe even the implement that you use, all be reasonable modifications. We came up with a knee rehab template that's available. Also, if you want very specific advice, would recommend doing a consult with Dr. Derek Miles or Dr. Michael Ray, Dr. Michael Amato. These are the best in the biz, and they run our pain rehab service. Would you expect to lose strength running the hypertrophy template for an intermediate level lifter who had just come off a couple runs of the Bridge 1.0, trying to figure out what to expect? So good question. So one, I don't think that using the nomenclature beginner, intermediate, advanced lifter is terribly useful because it doesn't affect management or expectations. So when somebody tells me they're an intermediate lifter, I don't know what that means, and it doesn't make me change their programming. And just similarly, if someone says they're advanced, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Rather, I think you could have, beginners and then non-beginners. So beginners just meaning that somebody who's previously untrained. So would I expect somebody who has just run the Bridge 1.0 a few times to get weaker on the hypertrophy template? And so again, strength is specific to what you're training. The Bridge 1.0 program is much more focused on a squat, bench, deadlift than the hypertrophy template is going to be. That being said, given this theoretical arc that I think you're following in your training program, some beginner program and then the bridge and then hypertrophy program, I wouldn't expect you to get weaker. I'd probably expect you to get stronger. And I actually know some more experienced lifters who've gotten stronger on the hypertrophy template. One guy pulled a PR deadlift close to 600 pounds while running the hypertrophy template. So it's my expectation is that you'll do great. You'll do fine. I hope that that is the case. There's the alternative situation where maybe you don't do as great, but at the same time you're running a hypertrophy template, so I don't know that strength should be your first priority whilst running that template. Yeah. During the bench press, right side pushing strength is a lot weaker when grinding heavy reps. The right scapula loses correct position. Right arm circumference is also 1 inch smaller. Should I do unilateral training? I don't necessarily think so. I don't know that I'd be grinding out a bunch of reps. It sounds like your technique could use some refinement, and depends how long you've been dealing with this and how long you've been training. If you've only been training a year or less, I think this is one of those things that works itself out, provided you get on the correct program. And you probably shouldn't be grinding most or any of your reps because it's just not useful. Is there a big improvement from eating 10 fruits and veggies per day versus 5? Yeah, it's a dose-dependent relationship between plant matter consumption and overall health outcomes. So yes. Is there anything inherently wrong? Oh, this is a good setup. Is there anything inherently wrong with rucking for conditioning? It's about the only form of cardio that I find I can enthusiastically adhere to. That's fine. I mean, I think it does limit the breadth of your conditioning sort of adaptations because you're not engaging in any rowing or cycling or anything else like that. So if you wanted to have a broad base of physical sort of conditioning, you would want to have exposed yourself to more training, right? More different types of training rather than just one. But you'll be great at rucking. Jordan just finished week 1 of the bridge. Is there a reason why day 3 starts with deadlift instead of squat? Yeah, we want you to deadlift fresh. There's nothing inherently better about starting with the squat first all the time. We're not trying to prioritize the squat over the deadlift. We're trying to prioritize strength in the squat, bench, and deadlift on the program. Also, can I do the paused bench after the tempo squat? I would not. I would rather have you do the paused bench fresher and the tempo squat with more fatigue. It'll decrease the weight on the tempo squats and increase the weight on the pause bench relative than if you flip them. Yeah. Hey, what form of conditioning would you recommend for the vast majority of powerlifters? Treadmill, stationary bike? I do both. Treadmill, stationary bike, rower. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. Sled work. Yeah. There's not a specific type. I would do a lot of different types. Physiologically, what genetic differences are there between two people with the same sex, anthropometry, body composition, muscle mass, and training history, but different Wilks scores? So I think the last time I looked at this, there were close to 76 identified genetic loci that are associated with a distinct, like close to 1% or greater athletic advantage. So, and that was, I mean, I looked at that. That must have been a year ago. I think was the last time I actually did a deeper dive in that. It would not surprise me if at this point we're close to 100, and at the end of it all, when we've fully characterized this thing, we're talking about hundreds of different gene loci. So yeah, a lot of different things. A lot of different things. ACTN3 gene is like the most well characterized one, but there's again a plethora of them. Whenever I calculate my weight for, let's say, RPE9 from an RPE8, I always overshoot and do RPE10. Always happens with upper body lifts. I rest 3 minutes. Am I doing something wrong? You could rest longer, 4 minutes if this is a conditioning thing. It depends how long you've been training. Or just take more conservative jumps would be the two strategies to use there. I don't think taking rest periods that are longer than like 5 minutes are very productive for training. Unless you're really close to a meet and you're trying to simulate meet situations where you're going to have much longer rest periods. But yeah, taking more conservative jumps be a good idea. Have you ever done RDLs off a deficit, so it's the same range of motion as a deadlift from the floor? Yes, although I do stiff-legged deadlifts like that. So typically with RDLs, the idea for me, it's not I'm not trying to mimic the same range of motion. I'm trying to really work the top down while maintaining the normal extension of the spine. And then again, I'm trying to make it a little less fatiguing than pulls from the floor. Stiff-legged deadlifts off a deficit end up being a little, about the same amount of fatigue as a regular deadlift if you're using like similar RPEs and rep ranges, but usually you'll do them for higher reps. When to take creatine for best results? There's no best time, just as long as you take it every day. Yep, I did a video about this. It's on the tubes on the Barbell Medicine channel, so would recommend watching that on creatine dosing. Hey Jordan, thoughts on creatine causing hair loss? Apparently there was a study with rugby players, and maybe you've seen it. Yeah, so it was not about creatine and hair loss. It was about creatine and DHT levels. So DHT levels are in general associated, like higher DHT levels are in general associated with male pattern baldness. However, DHT levels fluctuate throughout the day. DHT receptor density, so that's target site of activity, also fluctuate in response to DHT levels. And so just saying that something increases DHT doesn't necessarily mean it increases male pattern baldness, and that study did not actually look at male pattern baldness at all. So right now, we don't really have evidence that this occurs. And further, I think the big thing is if you have male pattern baldness, if it runs in your family, like there's not a lot that you can do to make that better. There are some medications that you can take that might preserve some hair, but as far as actually and then accelerating it, if you take anabolic androgenic steroids, that tends to accelerate male pattern baldness, but creatine I don't think is quite there yet. So, does VO2 max increase benefit hypertrophy strength in any way other than quicker recovery between sets? Oh, does a VO2 max increase hypertrophy or strength in any way other than quicker recovery between sets? Yeah, so outside of like improved work capacity so that you're ready to train more readily for the next set, you also can handle more training, which you'll actually need because there's a dose dependent relationship between training volume and strength and hypertrophy. So, hey Jordan, thanks for taking the time to do these and answering our questions. You're welcome. How much weight loss would you recommend in a specific period? Currently at 217, started from 232. Would it be beneficial to take a break from a calorie deficit? Yeah, so again, it depends on context. If you have a person who's going to be adherent either way, I don't see a reason to take a break from the diet. It's not necessarily going to improve outcomes unless it would improve adherence. If adherence is good, and or there's some indication to continue losing weight because the risk of not losing weight is greater than maintaining the benefits of maintaining weight, then I would encourage further weight loss. So usually 2.5% body weight per month is kind of the recommendation there. Jordan, my biomechanics professor, says deep squats is horrible for your knees, and I cringed. Yeah, you just ask him for a citation. You just ask him for a citation, and you can. There's a Schoenfeld study and a Hartman, Haartmann. Is it 2 A's or 2 N's or both? I forget. Those two recent studies on squat biomechanics actually like fully rebuts anything your biomechanics professor suggests about this, and then I'm kind of like, why is this his opinion? Yeesh. Jordan, do you recommend adding any conditioning routines, say once per week for novices starting linear progression? Yeah, well, one, I don't recommend starting linear progression. I think the program has many holes in it, and conditioning is one of them. Would not recommend. I would recommend you start our beginner template. It's a much better program for most individuals and includes conditioning, and that would be my recommendation for conditioning for untrained individuals. I believe you said that the bench press responds better to higher volume than, say, the back squat. No, I didn't say that. Yeah, there's a dose-dependent relationship between training volume and strength and hypertrophy, and this is, universal. Like as far as absolute amounts, it might be higher for upper body stuff, but I don't necessarily believe that to be true either. Yeah. Hey, cool glasses. Thanks. Finally out of a rotation and able to catch this live. Gonna enjoy this with some wine. Cheers. Cheers. Topo Chico. Drink of champions. I feel like I should put this out of the frame so like we're not advertising for them. Thanks for taking a pic with me at Raw Nationals. It was great meeting you guys. We also need those Barbell Medicine singlets to come back. Yeah, we're that's awesome, man. Good to see you on here. I think we're gonna make some SBD singlets with the Barbell Medicine logo on them. SBD, they like our stuff and we like their stuff, so it's gonna be great. Jordan, deadlift, bench, and press are all going up. Okay. Squat has been stuck at 340 for about 8 months. Should I just quit lifting and do Pilates instead? Probably not. I'd be curious to know what programming you're running and, overall what your squat has looked like in the last 8 months from a progression or regression standpoint. Yeah. But if your deadlift is going up and your bench is going up, it seems like you still have some progress left in you. Since older adults are more anabolically resistant than younger folks, how many grams per kilo body weight of protein do you recommend per day? Yeah, so the recommendations from ESPN for healthy aging, I believe, is 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight per day. That being said, our general recommendation includes older individuals, 1.6 all the way up to 3.1 grams per kilo per day, just depending on other contextual factors like gaining weight, losing weight, some disease that makes them more anabolic resistant or not. But yeah, if you get close to that 1 gram per pound, which is 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight per day, then you're going to be okay. I don't know that you need to make it more complicated than that. Doc, are the Bridge 3.0 and Strength 1 significantly different? They are, yes. Trying to decide whether or not to buy Strength 1. I already own Bridge 3. Yeah, so I think, if you are going to limit, if you're going to train 3 days per week and you're interested in driving up your bench press, your squat, and your deadlift, Strength 1 is the plan. If you can expand your training to 4 days a week, would do Strength 2. Yeah, given that you just ran the Bridge 3.0. Is stimulation of the lymphatic system via foam rolling one of the reasons people find a perceived benefit from it? No. The foam rolling does not stimulate the lymphatic system because it's, not, you can, mechanical compression can like move things around, but it's not stimulating. Yeah, foam rolling does not do anything. It does not decrease injury risk, doesn't decrease pain or things like DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, doesn't decrease risk of injury, and it actually can reduce performance and potentially cause harm as well if you have a very aggressive foam rolling session. If it makes you feel better, that's cool. I would do it after training, but I would not recommend people do it to start out with. The main thing is it builds these narratives that are not great. Like the narrative that it builds is that you need to do this sort of thing mechanically to repair yourself, restore yourself, because you are otherwise broken, damaged, and are like a car or a machine, when that's not true. We are highly adaptable, highly resilient, biological organisms. So, is there a general recommendation for how much one should increase training volume if they decided more volume is necessary? No, unfortunately not. Yeah, I think, usually somewhere in that 10 to 20% range of weekly volume tends to be like my sweet spot. Yeah. Current med student, can't really afford to pay for the templates. Any alternatives? I'm in the beginner to intermediate range. Well, our beginner prescription is free. It's free download. Bridge 1.0 is a free download. General strength training program is free download. That being said, I was in med school. I remember, and I think, one night of drinking with the buddies, that gets you a template. So, yeah. Can creatine lead to urinating more frequently? No, not that I've seen any data on. So, do you think fasting 24 hours one time per week is an acceptable strategy for calorie reduction? No, I don't. Yeah, the data on intermittent fasting suggests that people don't lose more weight when they do it. The attrition rate is a little higher, but maybe not statistically significant so the dropout rate, right, for people in intermittent fasting arms versus regular calorie restriction arms is similar, although maybe a little higher in intermittent fasting, although again, it might not be significant. So I don't know if that's really a valid criticism. On the other hand, if someone prefers intermittent fasting, that's fine. But just doing it one day a week, it doesn't fix the main problem, which is dietary patterns. It's just doing something one day a week. Might be a decent start for somebody, to get them in the right headspace, to get them more resources, more tools, more different strategies to adhere to a calorie-restricted diet. But this is not going to be enough for most folks. Physician prescribed testosterone for short-term fat loss. Thoughts? For that indication, nope. But there's usually more to the story than that, so would reserve judgment. But yeah, not a great medication for short-term fat loss, just for that indication alone. On bench, my feet tend to slip on my lifting platform. Any coating to put down on the platform, or possibly something on my shoes? If you're on wood, like a wooden platform, you might need to use rubber mats underneath the bench and underneath your feet. If you can put carpet over it, that would work. Do you have any ab work besides what naturally occurs in the lifts we all see you doing regularly? Yeah, I do a lot of ab wheel rollouts, V-sits, L-sits, stuff like that. Yeah. Random topic change, but I saw the story about the new lenses. Yeah. Why'd you get a 50 but not a 35, and what Sony body do you shoot with? So I have a 35 f1.2 Sigma Art lens. I also have their 24 1.4. So I have a bunch of primes now. I think my prime collection is set for video work. I have a A6500 and an A7R3 is what I shoot on. I feel like it's hard to train consistently in medical school. Do you have any tips? Yeah, I can empathize because, you're very busy, and you may not be as fortunate to have either a gym in your garage or a gym that's on campus or close to you or whatever. But honestly, medical school, especially the preclinical years, there's a substantial amount of time to train. And if you're not going to take the 60 minutes or 90 minutes out of your day to dedicate to your own well-being, your own health, I don't know how to convince you that that's more important than something else. I think there's all this pressure also. I can understand all this pressure. You got to learn everything. You have to know everything and whatever. But if you're really unhealthy and really unhappy, and training helps make you healthier and happier, then I think you have to engage in training. And Austin and I talked about this on our training podcast, or med school podcast. Yeah, I don't know. It was not something that I struggled with. But if it were me and I was struggling with it, then I would literally schedule it. I'd put it in my phone after whenever my last, mandatory thing is. I have to go to the gym. I'd make sure I had my gym clothes either on my bag or in my car if I drove on campus, and then I would go. Yeah, that's what I would do. Jordan, to what extent is hypertrophy possible without a calorie surplus? My current thinking is the more trained a person, the less this is possible. Yeah, in general, the more trained you become, the less it's possible. Also, there's a big genetic component here. Maybe 50, 60, 70% of the hypertrophy potential of a person is genetically, influenced or determined, guided. People aren't going to like that, but, sometimes it do be like that. In any event, I think that if you're not gaining weight, the idea that you're gaining substantial amounts of lean body mass probably is not true. Some people will, yeah. Particularly as the less trained they are, the more favorable their genetic profile is. Yeah. Are slower rates of weight loss beneficial from a loose skin perspective? Not from any objective standpoint that I've seen, no. What's the link between osteoarthritis and wear and tear? So since you're in medical school, I'm going to use the Socratic method and direct you to our resources on osteoarthritis. But here's a thought experiment for the people at home. So osteoarthritis previously was, and maybe even sometimes currently, depending on who's giving the diagnosis, was referred to as this diagnosis of wear and tear, your wear and tear on the joints, and then when you talk about obesity, people who have higher rates of osteoarthritis, it's because you're putting more force, more pressure on the joints. It's like, okay, if that's your explanation, well, why do obese people also have osteoarthritis in their wrists and fingers and elbows, these non-weight-bearing joints? Doesn't make sense, right? So one of the connections between obesity and osteoarthritis that also kind of elucidated these pathways, other pathways of osteoarthritis, have to do with adipokines and other sort of inflammatory signaling molecules that ultimately can cause osteoarthritis. What's the best thing for osteoarthritis? Usually physical activity. Yeah. It's like first line treatment in addition to education. Thoughts on fiber supplementation? It's reasonable. Yeah, psyllium husk, it's fine. I think, after recommending eating more fruits and vegetables, that can be a reasonable recommendation, sure. What's the correlation between heavy squats and ascending aortic aneurysm? No correlation. Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, ascending aortic aneurysms are rare, and ascending aortic aneurysms during squatting are also rare. It's funny because at a seminar in New York, this guy wrote down on his intake form that he had an ascending aortic aneurysm, and I went up to him and I was like, "Hey man, is this okay? Have you been cleared to exercise by your doctor?" He goes, "Well, yeah, I'm a doctor also, et cetera, et cetera." And I was like, "Okay, well, as long as you guys know and are in agreement, we're good to go here." Jordan, do you think there is an anecdotal correlation between upper body muscle mass and bench press performance? I don't just think there's an anecdotal correlation. I think there's empirical, and also just objective scientific evidence between upper body muscle mass and bench press performance. Yeah. So according to my calculations, I've been here for almost an hour. So thank you so much for watching here on Instagram, YouTube, wherever you're checking this out at.
Ride with me if you ride with me, you can slide with me if you feel like 550 on the 5 sticky, come get high with me, that's a deal, right? Ride with me if you ride with me, you can slide with me if you feel like 550 on the 5 sticky, come get high with me, that's a deal, right? That's a deal, right? That's a bet, right?